I got an email the other day from a dad who said they were in the car listening to the radio and they were talking about inflation. And the 7-year-old in the back pipes up and says, well, that's because of the Federal Reserve. And the dad is like, half of Congress doesn't even know that. And here's my 7-year-old who gets it.
That's great.
So it's those stimulating kind of intellectual experiences that I think gratify a lot of parents. And that's exactly what parents want for their kids, is to see them learn more about the world around them.
The story is those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it. That's why 2 children, twins by birth and surnamed Tuttle, travel throughout time and space to learn from the giants of history principles of freedom, economics, and government. But what inspired the Tuttle Twins' adventures? And how are they inspiring millions of people, young and old, to think deeper and differently about the world around them? I'm Joel Ackerman. This is Lightwise. Connor Boyack is the president and founder of the Libertas Institute, a nonprofit think tank dedicated to building a freer society. He's also a public speaker and author of over 30 books, including the mega-successful Tuttle Twins series, on which the hilarious and educational animated Angel Studios show Tuttle Twins is based. You can watch the first seasons of Tuttle Twins for free in the Angel app. Connor, welcome to Lightwise.
Thank you.
First of all, what inspired you to write these books?
Well, so through Libertas Institute, we try and change laws. We work with elected officials to say, hey, let's get rid of that law, let's repeal that. We build campaigns to try and create the right political pressure to protect our freedoms. And I've been having a ball, and I was doing that for a few years. This was 2014. My oldest child was 5. Okay. And I would come home every day and, tell me what you did today. Oh, I played with these toys, or I watched a movie.
At least your kids are interested. My kids don't care what I do.
Well, to each their own. But my 5-year-old, he would start to be like, what did you do today, Dad? I'm like, I typed on a computer. I wanted to teach him substantively what I was doing, trying to fight for our freedoms, but lacked the language with which to go communicate that to him. So I literally went on Amazon as kids' books that teach about property rights or, capitalism or whatever. And there was nothing. So I was talking with a buddy of mine. We'd been talking for a little while about this. He also had young kids. He's an illustrator, Elijah Stanfield. So we start cooking up this idea. What if we did a kid's book, And we just decided to do one just as a labor of love. This was not a strategic plan. It was, no big vision for anything. It was just, what book would we want to create for our kids? And we created it. A lot of other people bought it too. That to us was a little bit of a signal that, hey, maybe there's something here. People were saying, when's the next one coming out? We'd say, yeah, we'll get working on that. So we did a second and then a third, and then it just kind of slowly snowballed from there. And it's been amazing. But it was all born out of a father's need or desire to talk to his kids and help them understand these ideas. And now millions of other parents can do the same.
It's a great story. My question is, number one, why do you think there weren't any books about this? And what about school? Why are the kids not learning this in school?
Schools today are so different than the way they used to be. And they have not been very great for a long time. Here's a story to indicate that. In 1983, Ronald Reagan is president, and his administration puts together this group called the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They spend 18 months going across the country, interviewing teachers and students, reviewing curriculum. They're trying to wrap their heads around what is the state of school in America. At the end of the 18 months, they produce a report. It's called A Nation at Risk. And in that report, they say that there's a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens to overwhelm America's educational foundations. And that if a foreign government had attempted to impose on America the very mediocre standards that we now have today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we've allowed this to happen to ourselves. That was in 1983. So I do a lot of public speaking. I often share this story, and I usually say, raise of hands, how many people here think it's gotten better in the past 40 years? And no one's brave enough, I suppose, to raise their hand or venture that as their opinion. So to your question, I feel like schools have been dumbed down It's my belief that many schools are infiltrated by activist teachers who want to use that as a platform to push their ideas, and that parents who have perhaps, conservative values or, socially conservative values at least, are often unaware of what's going on in the classroom. They take for granted that, I turned out fine. I went to school,
right.
Good teachers, et cetera, and they don't realize what's happening. I think why libs of TikTok and other accounts like it have become so popular is that they're shining a spotlight on what's happening in our schools and raising a warning voice for parents to say, you might consider alternatives because things are not what they were a few decades ago. Even then there was a rising tide of mediocrity. Today it's much worse. So hey mom, hey dad, let's take action.
Yeah. Wow, terrific. And at this point, you've now sold over 5 million copies of these books. Why do you think they're so successful? Why are people resonating with it?
Well, I think you were kind of getting at this with your last question, why weren't there other books on Amazon? I think people are resonating because no one was doing this for a long time. No one thought, hey, we should teach our kids about these, principles of freedom and human flourishing.
Or they tried to teach them and they don't have the time, the means to...
Or they don't know how to simplify those ideas to a child's level, so they struggle with it. Honestly, the biggest impediment that we've seen is that many of these adults, the moms and dads, feel inadequate in their own understanding about these ideas. And so they don't know how to process it too well themselves, let alone explain and teach it to their children. And so our books, in effect, become a little bit of a crutch to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, you don't need to be an expert in economics or entrepreneurship or political science or whatever, right? Just read this book with your kids. And we got discussion questions. And so it's a very non-threatening way for those parents to not look stupid and not feel like they need to be the expert, right? It's just an invitation to learn and have an amazing family discussion.
And how much do you get feedback, or do you know how much of how many parents are just giving the books to their kids and saying, hey, read this? And how many parents actually do, as you said, sit there and read it with them?
Yeah, I'd say it's about half and half from the surveys that we've done. But what we like is that even for the families where they say, my kids just read that on their own, they basically 95% of them say that they are having enriched and higher level family discussions with their children. So we're transitioning things from,
That's great.
Hey honey, tell me how was your day? What did you learn today? I don't know, right? We're transitioning from that to actually intellectually stimulating conversation with children who have curiosity about the world around them. I got an email the other day from a dad who said they were in the car listening to the radio and they were talking about inflation. And the 7-year-old in the back pipes up and says, well, that's because of the Federal Reserve. And the dad is like, half of Congress doesn't even know that. And here's my 7-year-old who gets it.
That's great.
So it's those stimulating kind of intellectual experiences that I think gratify a lot of parents. And that's exactly what parents want for their kids, is to see them learn more about the world around them.
And it applies to them every day.
For sure.
Because it's the world they live in.
Right.
So about this topic with kids and parents, you've got books for toddlers, which is cool. You've got books obviously for kids and even teens. I'm not aware of any books for adults. Do you feel like that's because they're a lost cause, or are these books pretty targeted just to people who are gonna want these values anyway? Or do you have any mind for the future about a book that might help convert some people to some of these principles of freedom?
So that's a great question. The reality is I feel like those books already exist. It's just that a lot of people are unaware of them. I'll give you a specific example. There's a fantastic book written decades ago by an economist named Henry Hazlitt, and it's called Economics in One Lesson. Very simple, very straightforward, written for adults. Decades ago, the words had a few extra syllables. We've kind of have dumbed down English and learning today, but it's a fantastic book. Well, we have a Tuttle Twins version of that book.
Okay.
Ours is called The Tuttle Twins and the Food Truck Fiasco. And so we went to Economics in One Lesson. We identified the 5 to 7 core ideas from the book. We extracted those ideas, wrapped them in a fun story, and that became the Tuttle Twins book. This is the formula for all of our children's books. Each of them says, let's take this powerful book, this influential book. Let's distill down the core nuggets. Our most recent one is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. We went to that book and said, what are the nuggets? Well, instead of 5 to 7, it was the 12 rules.
Sure.
We simplified those for kids a little bit, wrapped it in a fun story, and suddenly that same message about personal responsibility, integrity, hard work, good character is now accessible to kids. So the question, in terms of making it accessible to adults, not only are we simplifying it so more adults can get exposed to these core ideas, but at the end of our book, we say, hey, this was a fun little story, but it incorporates these ideas from this original book. Go check it out. So we have a page at the end dedicated to pointing the parents or the older kids to the original work to say, hey, if we've sparked your curiosity a little bit, if you'd like to know more, go get this original book and keep reading.
That's terrific. Was that a collaboration with Jordan Peterson, I'm guessing, or how did that organization work?
We had no direct collaboration. We definitely reached out to them, to say, hey, here's what our intentions are. So they gave their blessing.
Okay,
we had
great.
no, direct connection with them for the project. If the author who we're doing this with is dead, then, whatever. But,
Yeah, sure.
but if they're alive, we want to kind of check in and say, hey, are you okay with us doing this? And everyone's been so warm. I mean, who wouldn't love their ideas that they are trying to teach the world to reach an even bigger audience?
Yeah.
And so it's worked out really well.
So what other texts have you done inspired some of these Tuttle Twins books?
Yeah, another big one is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, very popular book that a lot of people have read. We have a children's version of that. We have there's a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is all about the Federal Reserve and inflation. So we have the Tuttle Twins and The Creature from Jekyll Island. There's a phenomenal essay written in 1850 that's very well known in political circles called The Law, written by a French economist named Frédéric Bastiat. So that was our first book. Elijah and I were so influenced by that essay, The Law, that we wanted to do a book based on that. So we did that one. We did one based on The Road to Serfdom, which was written by F.A. Hayek, a Nobel Prize-winning free market economist, back when they gave the Nobel Prize to economists that actually supported free markets. So we take a lot of these important books that some people are very familiar with, others have never heard of, and that's the goal, right? To these parents, it's like, there's all these amazing books out there for you to go deep in your learning. Go check them out. So we love that a lot of parents haven't heard about a lot of these books.
The books, or at least the TV show based on your books, touts teaching principles of freedom, economics, and government. But, you also have character. You teach about the golden rule,
right,
hard work. How do those principles tie in to your grand scheme? Or are you basically just teaching whatever you feel like you want your kids to know?
So our worldview and perspectives, there are certain principles and ideas that shape an individual in a very productive and healthy way, but also an entire society. So the question for us, I think, is what are those principles? How do we have to order our lives individually and socially with one another to produce the maximum output of peace, prosperity, productivity? And so for me, it's all about teaching those ideas. Some of them may be political, some of them may be economic, some of them may be social, but to me, it's like the hub and spoke. They're all connected to this central goal, which is, what are the things that we can be doing to create the most human flourishing possible? I'm very much open to the fact that some of our books lean a little bit more political, some are more, on social issues like the golden rule and so forth. But that is the central theme of all of them, is like these principles, if lived by individually, will improve your life. But in the aggregate, if they're lived by, it will make for a safer and better society.
Yeah, great. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite lesson that you've taught?
Isn't that like asking a parent who their favorite child is? Or,
I don't know.
I'll give an answer nonetheless. I would say my favorite book is one that doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's one of our most important ones that we wrote. It was our 9th one in our children's series, called The Tuttle Twins and the Fate of the Future. This book is based off of Murray Rothbard's book, Anatomy of the State. He talks about what is the state, the government, how is it constructed and so forth. And the point of his book and ours is to say that consent matters. The Declaration of Independence, it says that just governments or governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. What does that actually mean? Have you ever given your consent? Have we ever signed a document? You know, you get a cell phone contract or you buy a house, or you're signing an explicit consent.
Right.
I will abide by these terms. You download software, right? No one ever reads the terms and conditions, but we're saying, I agree, right? So when it comes to government that has the ability to jail you, to take your property, to do all these things, how do we actually consent? What does it look like to have a government that honors the Declaration of Independence, where we can actually consent to what we are living under rather than just feeling like, you know, we're being ruled by the tyranny of the majority or whatever. So it's a fascinating book. It's far more theoretical in the sense that it's hard to imagine those abstract ideas in a day-to-day sense in our government, but they're really important questions. And given the title of our book, The Fate of the Future, we say, like, look, the future hangs in balance. Are we going to deal with things, our social problems in our society, through coercion, through the state, where we force other people to act certain ways and we pass laws and we restrict people over here? Is that the way to create a good society? Or should we have persuasion and voluntary action and people of goodwill trying to come together to solve these big problems together? And it's this fork in the road that we're always presented with to say, what do you want to do? Do you just want to like beat people over the head and say, do what I tell you? Or can we use persuasion and try and encourage other people to build the society that we envision?
I feel like if you ask people and pose it as you've posed it, most people are going to say the latter.
Of course.
But in practical terms, it seems to me like we're operating much more under the former.
That's exactly right.
So where's the disconnect there?
The disconnect is that people have cognitive dissonance. What I mean by that is they're holding two ideas at once. The idea that they believe, oh, I'm a moral person who just uses persuasion, and of course that's the right thing to do. But they also hold this idea in their mind that whatever shows up on the voting ballot is an okay way to do things. Here's a concrete example. Let's say my kids love soccer, and we want a soccer park here in our city. There's a proposal from the city. We're going to raise everyone's taxes, and we're going to make a soccer park. Well, many people will say, oh, yeah, we should only use, persuasion and blah, blah, blah. But they'll go vote for that soccer park because they want it. There's personal benefit.
Yes.
And so people kind of shut off the thinking of, well, wait a minute, what about the grandma in a fixed income whose property values have gone up because everyone around her is building, and she no longer has an income, but her property taxes are going up. She has no more money. She's living off of razor-thin margins, and now you want to increase her taxes? People don't really think through the ramifications of those things. So I feel like it's the cognitive dissonance where people who might agree in principle, in theory, oftentimes violate it in practice because they haven't really learned how to connect the theory to the practice and realize, oh, well, wait a minute. If I do believe in persuasion, maybe I shouldn't be compelling all my neighbors to pay for a soccer park that I want for my kids.
Yeah, I want to go back to this idea that you talked about consent. First of all, that was a great example. But this idea of consent, does your book or his book, is it his?
Murray Rothbard, yeah.
Murray Rothbard, give any concrete solutions for how to give consent? And what do you say to the people who say, well, you consent by living here.
Right.
If you really don't want to consent to being ruled, then move.
Right. It's a great question. So I wrote a separate book, not a Tuttle Twins book, for teenagers and adults. It's more simplified, called Lessons from a Lemonade Stand. I answer your question by looking at a lemonade stand where you've, I'm sure, seen the stories of little kids getting their lemonade stand shut down because they don't have a permit.
My nieces and nephews were one of them. No, I guess theirs was a hot chocolate stand.
That's right, over in Saratoga Springs, right? Yeah, that's right. I remember that story. So I look at it through a lemonade stand to say, let's analyze this situation. And one by one, let's take critiques like the one that you just articulated. Well, you live here, so you've consented. Or you voted in the election, so you've consented. Or you pay your taxes, so you've consented. We probably don't have time here to get into the details, but one by one, I kind of go through and say, that doesn't really apply. Let's just answer yours at least to do it justice. If you were to say to me, you live here, Connor, so you've consented to the government, that's like telling a woman who's being, abused by her husband that she's consented to it because she lives in the same household, right? Physical location does not imply consent. When you look at the word consent itself, the original etymological kind of definition of the word consent, it means a yielding of the mind, an agreement. Like you've proposed something and I've yielded my mind. Yes, I agree. Let's do that. I've consented to it. And that doesn't happen when there's abusive behavior of any kind, whether physical assault or taxes or, jail or whatever. So it's I
think that's a great example. And I think it's a timely example, given that this issue of consent with the Me Too movement and everything has really brought a lot of these issues, the issue of having to give consent and the importance of consent to the forefront. I'm actually shocked that I haven't heard more of this in a political setting than
Me too.
Until now.
Me
and
too.
I think it would be timely to get it out there.
And the hard thing, I feel like, is to answer the other part of your question, what are the solutions? How do you actually get consent with the government? Not implied consent. Your idea of, or not your idea, but the one that you just shared about, well, you live there, therefore you've consented. That's called implied consent. We're seeing that you live there, therefore we think that's you implying that you consent.
Right.
But everything else we do of any significance in our lives is explicit consent. You're saying, yes, I agree, or push the button and I agree. So Murray Rothbard's idea, which we share in the book, is a radical one. It's a very different government model than we have today, which is why it's kind of in the abstract. And it's called Polycentric Law. What that really means is overlapping government. So imagine if you, let's say I live in Provo, Utah, where we're filming this, and I have a home. Well, rather than me just having to be part of the Provo government and then the Utah County government and then the Utah government, just by virtue of the fact that I live there, what if you could pick and choose the government that you wanted with a competitive landscape of different governments? Imagine if you could live in your house and say, well, if I affiliate with government A, I'm going to get trash service and fire protection and police services and schools and everything else, right? And that costs more money. So the taxes become almost like a membership fee that no one says that you're being taxed for your cell phone bill or insurance. You've agreed to pay it, so it's, it's not this oppressive tax. I might then say, well, government B is kind of lean and mean. They'll only do fire and police, but no education, no other benefits and stuff, but it's cheaper. And I'm a starving student, so maybe I'll just go with the lean and mean option. I'm consenting. I'm saying, yeah, like if something happens, I want you to come protect me, or you want, And so it's a totally different way of thinking about government, where we have our property and then we can pick and choose, like we do with cell phone companies or other services, to say who we want to affiliate with, rather than saying, you know what, everyone in this geographic boundary that happens to live there, you're going to have to abide by the same government. Even if, let's say, everyone in the government is conservative, all the liberals that live there, they haven't consented to all those conservative policies, right? Or vice versa. If it's a very liberal area and you got those conservatives, they haven't agreed to all the stuff that the liberal city council is doing. But if people could affiliate with exactly who they wanted and we could have a freedom of association in that way, it would be a radical rethinking of how we actually govern ourselves. And we could move away from implied consent to explicit consent, which I think is the true aspiration of the Declaration of Independence.
And as you pointed out, it creates competition, which should improve mediocrity.
Absolutely. And lower prices, perhaps.
Right,
even, right?
Yeah. You brought up liberals and conservatives. Do you feel like your books are neutral, that the principles everyone basically should be on board with them? Or is there a, partisanship to them? Do they lean one way or the other?
Totally. Yeah. I think the question is answered by the title of our podcast, which is The Way the World Works. We feel like the Tuttle Twins books teach the ideas of how the world works. The world doesn't work one way if you're a conservative, or one way if you're a liberal, or if you're a agnostic politically or whatever. There are, again, certain principles and ideas that govern our society. And so we think those are kind of what we today call the classical liberal ideas, which really just means the founding fathers era It's not the modern liberal, it's
Right.
the classical liberal, back when liberal basically meant libertarian, of this very approach where we have very limited government, maximum freedom, entrepreneurship, people being able to buy and sell with one another and improve their lives. And so for that reason, our books today tend to resonate the best with people who are right of center, who do have a little bit more libertarian, classical liberal founding fathers in them. However, a number of our books especially are very appealing to people, say, even on the left. Something like The Golden Rule, right, is just very open and inviting to people regardless of your political spectrum.
Commonly, I hear in my conversations with people this perception that, and this might be a dangerous question because you work closely with a lot of politicians, I think, but that basically at this point, and maybe truer now, this is the idea that's being presented, right, that I hear a lot, that the truer now than it's ever been, if you go into politics, you must be corrupt, like you just want power. In your experience, is that true, or is it something else?
I think probably the 80-20 rule applies there, right? Probably 80% that applies to, especially at the federal level where there's a lot of power. I think you see that a lot less at the state level, in state legislatures. You often see many more people who want to do the right thing, who want to go, pass good laws or protect our rights. And then weirdly, at the city level, you get a far greater tendency of people who are willing to control their neighbors. You get these weird good old boy clubs at a local level where they will use zoning laws and other things to say, oh, you can't have chickens in your backyard. You can't paint your fence brown. And it's like, I thought we live in America, right? Like, why can't I do this? And so weirdly, the city level tends to attract a lot of kind of power-minded people who are willing to boss people around. The states, so Libertas, we're focused at a state level. I think that's where the sweet spot is. That's where you can push back on the federal government. It's where you can push back on the city governments and keep them in check. And you are able to work with a lot of elected officials at that level who have a bit more noble-minded intent, I feel like, than you can often find at other levels of government.
Yeah, and about this, why is it, do you think, that when I would say the majority of people, when they think about politics, they think about the federal level? Would you agree with that?
100%.
And yet, the thing that they have most control over is their local government. That's where they could have the most impact. If I want to influence a national election, I almost can't do that. I don't have a platform, and it's a huge country. But I probably could have some city or maybe even state influence if I really wanted to work hard. Do you feel like there's a design or any kind of nefarious plot, like keep people focused on federal issues so they're not focused on the things that hit them most at home? Or is it just people being uneducated about where they can have the most effect?
I think it's a mix of both, but I think the real answer is the simple economics of the so-called news industry. Decades ago, you would have reporters in every city council meeting across the country. You'd have local newspapers. You'd have journalists there with, shining a spotlight on what the city was doing. You'd have people reading city newspapers, telling them what's happening. And we've lost that with advertising and online and everything else. Most newspapers are completely folding, if not having to run a lot more Associated Press national articles to fill their pages. They can't pay for all these, reporters anymore. So now when you go to city council meetings, you don't see any reporters at all. And if you're a corrupt city councilor, you can get away with a lot more than you ever could before.
Interesting.
We're seeing a little bit of pushback with citizens who will show up and, live stream a city council or post on a Facebook group and alert the community. So we see a little bit of organizing like that. But you're exactly right. Everyone's attention is drawn most to the very level of government that they can impact the least. And I feel like a lot of it is people are letting off steam. They'll tweet or post on Facebook, Biden said this or Congress did that, right? And they let off this steam. Feels good. It's cathartic, to shout at your TV. But steam, if collected and channeled, can power a locomotive. Like we can do amazing things with that energy if we gathered it in the right way and focused it. So a lot of my message to people in the political realm is, fine, keep watching the TV or keep paying attention to national news, but carve out like 10 or 20% of your media consumption for your local, newspaper or news website, Facebook community group or whatever, just to make sure you're in the loop of what's happening. Because you're exactly right. If you apply that energy to a local level, you could impact a lot of things, and people don't really realize it. So I think it's really important to steer people's attention away where they feel so defeated. They feel like, I can't do anything about, Congress or whatever. It's like, why not focus on an area where you can actually do something? That would be empowering. You would feel confident. You would grow in your ability to influence more people. But people are very incapacitated and almost like paralyzed into inaction. And so we're trying to get them to go take action by saying, focus on the area that you can actually impact.
I think it's good advice. You've had a great amount of influence, over 5 million copies sold. You're doing all kinds of things with Libertas, changing laws. Do you feel like you've been targeted either by groups, individuals, or even the government at all? Do you feel like you've been targeted?
Oh, I've definitely been targeted. We've had to call the police. We've had to, I've had to take some various security measures in past years. We have people attacking us for the Tuttle Twins. I mean, CNN came after us a few months ago and said that we were creating a right-wing children's education complex. I was like, what? But we sold over 100,000 books directly as a result of that CNN article.
So it all just goes.
Oh, it was great. I said, hey, MSNBC, you wanna pile on? Help me sell more books. We have our detractors. We have people who say nasty things about us on social. But I have very thick skin personally. My wife is always like, I can't imagine doing what you do, and I just, whatever, it's no big deal. I was bullied a lot as a kid. I was very short. So I feel like I kind of got through in my early years the trauma of being attacked by others and was somehow able to develop this kind of like indifference towards other people's opinions, coming to realize like, fine, you're criticizing me, but who are you? And one of the quotes I love, I don't remember how I came across this. I wish I could attribute it. But the quote was, never listen to criticism from a person whose advice you would not seek. In other words, criticism is fine when it's someone who wants to build you up and make you better, but when it's meant to tear you down, like, why am I going to listen to you? So in the political realm, I do have thick skin. We do get attacked, but I wouldn't be, to me, it's a sign that we're having an impact.
Yeah.
We're upsetting a few apple carts, and that needs to happen if we're going to have some healthy change. And not everyone's going to love that. So it's just a byproduct of the job.
I want to ask you about your book called America's History. This is a series of Tuttle Twins stories that focuses not just on the events leading up to the revolution, but the reason for the events, why they happened.
Yep.
Tell me about this book and why.
So our team bought about a dozen textbooks, the most popular ones being used in 4th to 8th grade to teach social studies or history. And our theory when we bought all these books that were used by like 80% of schools, because most of the schools all use the same textbooks. Our theory was that these textbooks likely do not teach, American history in any depth. That was kind of the working theory. So we start reading all these books, we flip through them, and the books were phenomenal, these textbooks, at teaching superficial history. Who said what? On which date did this battle happen? They marched from here to here. These guys fought those guys. The clouds looked like this that day. They ate hardtack. They wore these uniforms. All the impressive trivia that if you were to...
Hardtack sticks with you, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I talked about hardtack all growing up.
It's like chewing gum. It stays in your gut for a decade. So if you want to impress people at a party with all this trivia, those textbooks are chock full of it, right? What these books all failed to do was to teach what I call not superficial history, but substantive history, the ideas, the values, the philosophies, the why. Why did they do this? What was going through their minds? What ideas were they advocating for as they did it? I don't want to only know that Congress did this. I want to know what the debate was. I want to know what arguments people were making. The quote we mentioned earlier, those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. We all do a horrible job at that quote. Why? Because today, millions of kids are not taught at all to learn from the past. They are simply taught about the past.
Right.
It's like we're walking them through a museum of American history, and we're like, oh, look, they used to dress like that. Look at the cannonballs they used to use. There's a musket. Okay, kids, let's go to the cafeteria. And sure, we learned some stuff about history, but we're not learning from history. History, the entire point of it, is to make our lives better, to help inform our own decisions to become better people. And if we're not extracting those nuggets, those lessons from history, then we're not doing it justice. We're not using history at all. So our book is, yes, American history, yes, lots of stories of what happened, but critically, the entire book is infused with the ideas and the values and the philosophies. And at the end of every chapter, we say, all right, you just learned about this idea, separation of powers, or whatever,
Yeah.
and here were the different ideas they were debating. Let's talk about how that applies today. Let's talk about what's going on in the world today so that you can take that idea from 250 years ago and understand how you might apply it in 2023 or whatever. And that way we feel like kids can develop a little bit of a muscle, like their muscles have atrophied in their ability to connect a historical idea to today. But if we help them, exercise that muscle of historical application, maybe we can create a generation of kids who know about and learn from history and therefore make smarter decisions today. Whether they end up being business owners or politicians or whatever, there's so many lessons the past has to offer us. I think we're neglecting 99% of them. So our book is trying to reverse that tide and help families learn from the ideas of the past.
Yeah, it seems like it would be important to understand the purposes behind the founding. One, to answer, like you said, learn from it to apply it in your own life and what you're experiencing today, but also to answer the question, which has recently become a big point of debate, which is America inherently good or evil? Did the 1619 Project influence us at all in the idea of, hey, were the founders really trying to basically prop up their little class of white farmers or whatever?
Right.
Was that an influence in this book at all?
I wouldn't call it an influence, but the 1619 Project definitely popped up into the zeitgeist right as we were starting this project. So we had it in mind. We're looking at what they're doing. And I would argue that our book, where you have the 1619 Project out there, our book is the 1215 Project. Right? Our book starts from 1215 and goes through 1776. And if we're trying to pinpoint a year in which America was conceived, which is the point of the 1619 Project, to say
Right.
that it was really started with the mass importation of chattel slavery from America. Our contention is that you have to go back to the 1200s, to the Magna Carta, and to Marco Polo. So Marco Polo in the 1200s is out exploring new lands, trying to find spices and treasures to bring them back, because all along the Silk Road, you have people trading and trying to better their lives. You have free trade emerging out of Italy and throughout the Silk Road. And so then you have all these explorers who have to go to faraway lands to find even more treasure. Exploration leads to colonization, which leads to America. The genesis of America predates the 1619 Project, as much of a stain as that is on history. I don't want to diminish how awful chattel slavery is.
Sure.
But the true story of America, I think, is back in the 1200s. It's people trying to make their lives better, trying to find new things to serve other people, to make their lives better. That to me is the story of America. So many people have come here, whether during the colonial era or since, to seek improvement of their life, to seek a better life, the American dream. They don't come here because they want to hate America, or that they think that black people are awful or anything like that.
Right.
They just want a better life. That's been the story since the beginning.
Finally, we've talked a lot about your books, but it has been turned into this great show with Angel Studios. How do you feel about the adaptation of what they're doing, and are you involved in that process at all?
Yeah, so I'm an executive producer, and my primary contribution to the cartoon is with the writing team. So as we work on all of the scripts, I'm involved 2 or I think 3 times for every episode to go through the entire process and make sure that all the ideas are being presented in the right way. So the writers are awesome comedians. They're, creating fun stories, making wisecracks.
It's a funny show. It's
a very funny show for adults or for kids. So it's fun to see their contributions. And they'll take like a first stab at the ideas and the values and the philosophies. I'll kind of come in and like streamline and say, oh, let's say it this way, or let's make sure to emphasize this point. Just making sure that the stories stay on track. From that point on, it goes to the storyboard artists and the animators and the voice actors and everything else. So I have less to do once we get the scripts done. But look, this is the culmination of a dream in the sense that, and I've spoken about this publicly before, that when we were doing the books, Elijah and I, we wanted to do a cartoon for 2-3 years. We had this idea. Elijah even animated this little 30-second clip that I could then use to go try and fundraise, because we're a nonprofit, Libertas, where we sell all the Tuttle Twins books. And so we were shopping it around. We were asking all these philanthropists for money to go build a cartoon, and just wasn't really making any progress. Chosen launches, 11 million, I think, that they did in their crowdfunding campaign. And one of the Harmon brothers with Angel Studios is on my board. And so we're all talking, and I'm like, we want to do a cartoon. He's like, well, we want to do a cartoon. Let's talk, And so we started all the discussions to see where it could go. And just so elated that we're at the point that we're at, because for so long we wanted the ability to create this, but we didn't have the means or the mechanism to do it. And with The Chosen and Angel kind of plowing the way with this crowdfunding, green light community model to kind of have the crowd and our community participate, it solved that exact problem. Suddenly we could go to our community of book readers and say, hey, we're doing this thing. Would you like to be a part of it? It wasn't just say, give us money. It was, you can actually have some skin in the game.
And you didn't have to raise taxes and have it government subsidized.
Exactly. So no, we're tickled. It's been a ton of fun. I hope this continues for seasons to come. It's just such a good quality cartoon. Not only is it funny, as you say, but it's teaching good values. You don't have to worry, like with Nickelodeon and some of this other stuff, that they're working all these weird ideas into the cartoons that your kids are watching on YouTube without you noticing. This is trusted content. The team behind it, I think, is very trustworthy, and I couldn't be more excited with how it's turning out.
Angel Studios' mission is to tell stories that amplify light. How do you feel Tuttle Twins TV show is doing that?
I think it's doing a fantastic job. I couldn't be happier, and I feel like we're bringing some light into an area of media that often has not gotten a lot of attention from families with conservative values or who care about freedom and so forth. It's a cartoon that's been a long time coming. I think it's turned out phenomenally, and I think every family in America needs to watch it.
Yeah. How do you answer the people who say this is propaganda?
That's a weird word. Propaganda is ultimately just the propagation of ideas. We use it in its negative connotation, like the Nazis and their and rightly so. There are negative sides to propaganda, but there's propaganda in our public schools. I can't tell you how many teachers are closing the door and they're just there, putting stuff in the kids' minds without parents knowing. We're not seeking to do that. We're not closing any doors. What we're doing is opening the door, putting the video content in the living room to say, hey, parents, watch this with your kids. Talk about it. Maybe you completely disagree. That's okay too. Talk about it, right? And evaluate. Let's have critical thinking.
And it seems like it's an underserved set of ideas, right?
Absolutely.
It's something that's not being talked about hardly at all.
Yep.
So it's just getting it out there. It's not forcing it down anyone's throat.
Yeah, again, we're propagating ideas. What you do with it, how you work through that in your family is up to you. But we think that these are ideas that have made the world a fantastic place, and we think that they will continue to do so. They're worth talking about. They are underserved. Not a lot of people are talking, especially to kids, about them. And so we feel like we need to propagate those ideas. So in a sense, sure, Tuttle Twins is propaganda, but so is everything. Every kid's project, cartoon, books, every book for adults, every magazine, TV show, TikTok, YouTube, it's all propaganda. Ultimately, the question is, are the ideas good and are they worth sharing with other people? In the case of the Tuttle Twins, I think the answer is an emphatic yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Connor. We appreciate you and all you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Lightwise is a video podcast production of Angel Studios, released every other Tuesday. To watch more episodes or be notified of new episodes of Lightwise, click subscribe or download the Angel app now, wherever you get your apps. If you'd prefer to listen instead of watch, you can find the Lightwise audio podcast version wherever you get your podcasts. Also, to watch the Tuttle Twins TV show, visit angel.com/Tuttle Twins. This episode of Lightwise was hosted by Joel Ackerman. It was written and directed by Joel Ackerman, produced by Cameron Jackson and John Shea Van Sickle, and edited by Cameron Jackson, with sound recording by Garrett Briggs and sound mixing by Brian Densley.